Greetings, MacNNers. It's Friday, October 30th, and that means it's time for another episode of the MacNN Podcast. Welcome back, MacNNers. It's always good to have you with us. Now, I'm Charles Martin. I'm the editor of MacNN, and this week I am in Ocoee, Florida. Last time you heard from me, I was in Canada in a place called Winnipeg, and now I am sweating to death in Florida. I know, I get around. What can I say? Anyway, joining me this week, we have an action-packed week, and joining me this week is one of our top staff writers, Malcolm Owen. Malcolm, hey.
Hello, I'm coming from South Wales. Last week I was in South Wales.
Next week you'll be in...
I don't know, actually.
Yeah, that's true. There's always a possibility of an adventure. So, the brand new Apple TV is now available in stores. You can get one. They start at $150 or $200, and they actually have storage on board. Now, this is something that the original Apple TVs had. They had a certain amount of storage. You could actually put TV programs, on the device for later replay. It was kind of like a DVR. This new Apple TV is a little bit different. That 32 or 64 gig amount of storage is intended for apps. Both the kind that that Tim Cook is talking about as the future of TV, channel apps like the HBO app or the ABC app, as well as games and other fun stuff. So it's essentially the same storage spaces as roughly iPhones have. And so you're expected to load them up with 100 or so apps you like. And that's in addition to the ones that are already built in. So that's nice. Also, this new one has an A8 processor, which means it's quite a bit faster, apparently. Mike has already noted in his hands-on, which is on the site, that the Apple TV is now much faster than before. But he's not a big fan of the remote yet. So maybe the remote is going to be a problem issue. We'll see. In the meantime, neither one of us have it yet. Mike's the only one that's got one, so we can't really say too much about it. But the interesting thing about it to me is that this is the first machine that comes under this new vision. And whether this originated with Steve Jobs was famous for saying that he'd cracked the television interface problem. Was this what he meant? Or is this Tim Cook's idea? Or is this somebody else's idea? We're going to have to find out. But I think that they are right to an extent. I certainly do enjoy my own TV watching. It's pretty limited, but what I do of it, I do with apps. In Canada, we have the Comedy Network, which is very similar to Comedy Central. And that's an app. You can get a CNN app. You can get a CBC app in Canada, obviously. PBS, Knowledge TV, a whole bunch of different ones. In fact, the one holdout that I'm really hoping will finally come to the table is Turner Classic Movies. I think I've mentioned this before on the podcast. It's my favorite channel by far.
You think?
Yeah. And so I would absolutely love and would even pay them a fairly significant amount each month to give me an app with their content. That's a channel I really like. So there's only a handful of other shows that I'm really interested in, but HBO's got their own app doing very well with it, Showtime, CBS, and so on. So I think that maybe they're right. It's sort of, I always imagined that the future of TV would be program oriented. You just watch the programs that you wanted. And to some extent, Netflix provides this or Hulu provides this. But it turns out, at least the way Apple has it set up, that it's more like channels as apps, but still channels. You like NBC, or you like MSNBC, or you like CNBC. And so you have that app and you get that content. But I do think this is going to be the beginning of the end for conventional cable television as we know it. I cut the cord quite a while ago, and I think more and more of us are going to start doing this, particularly as you realize that most of this content is already available on apps. Yes, presently you have to sign in to verify your cable subscription, but that wall is obviously cracking. I personally would love to see that just explode. I would love to see people just going, nope, you know what? I can do this all on apps. I can throw the content on my iPad over to the HDTV, thanks to AirPlay, thanks to the Apple TV. So why have conventional television? Other than, say, live sports or some sort of event like that, I'm not sure that there's much need for it. And, well, I have to confess, I enjoy sports more now than I did when I was younger, but I really don't watch sports much. What about you, Malcolm? Do you enjoy, what are your favorite programs? What do you enjoy?
Well, I think I've said this before. I have a very limited range of programs that I try to watch as much as possible. I mean, it's expanded a little bit, but that's because the shows I really like are things like game shows and so on and so forth. Things that don't really work well on services like Netflix. You can get reality shows on some of these streaming services, but at least ones like Netflix. But you don't have any quiz shows, that sort of thing. Yeah. And that's my kind of bag. The odd either quiz shows or oddball shows that you know full well are not going to be done as a long series-arching storyline where someone gets $1 million for standing on an island for too long.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite British quiz shows is QI. I don't know what letter they're up to by now, but they must be closing in on the end of the alphabet at this point.
I think they're roughly just past halfway.
Oh, excellent. Another 13 years of that, then. That'd be fine. It's hard to ask you any questions about the Apple TV because you don't have one, but do you use any TV apps? You know what I'm saying? Like apps that connect to one or more services, channels, whatever you want to call it.
Over here, it's slightly different. I know you have... There are some parallels, and then there are some which are definitely not parallels. Obviously, you do have your BBC, ITV, Channel 4, Channel 5 on-demand services. Major broadcaster Sky has its own on-demand catch-up and streaming apps as well. You can even get a Now TV box, which is basically a rebranded Roku box because they have shares in Roku. Thank you, Richard Murdoch.
Rupert.
Whatever his name is, I don't care for the man. Anyway, Thingy Murdoch has shares in Roku, so he's got basically a Roku box called Now TV, and you can access all your Sky content on that instead of buying a Sky box and getting satellite TV. So they're working on the cutting the cord thing their own way, and you can obviously use this app on loads of other devices as well.
What about now? You live in the UK, so therefore you have access to the iPlayer app. Have you used that? Have you tried it?
Yes. I think it's fair to say if I'm paying the equivalent of about £120, £130 a year for it, I think I'm going to use the app once or twice at least.
Now, do you use this mostly to watch shows? You know, like, oh well, somebody's watching something else on the TV. I'll just use iPlayer to watch the show I want to watch. Or do you use it to, oh, I missed something, I'll go back and watch it on iPlayer?
Well, I think it's probably more the latter. Mm-hmm. Well, put it this way, I think I've watched about 2 programs in the last 4 weeks live as broadcast on TV for the first time. The rest of them have been either recorded to the DVR or viewed through an on-demand service on the Skybox or through the iPlayer. And even then, the shows that I did manage to watch, I could still watch them on apps or on demand or whatever. There's nothing restricting these specific shows. I just happened to watch maybe 2.
Yeah. Although this does lead to a question now. In England, they've already sort of figured this out now, but you know, the ratings for programs there, you might get an initial rating of X number of millions of people have watched such and such. But then about a week later, they come out with a revised final figure that includes people who time shifted it on DVRs within a certain amount of time and watched it on iPlayer within a certain amount of time. So it turns out that they can fairly accurately measure how many people actually saw the show.
Well, actually, that's the weird thing. If you're talking about ratings specifically, and I'm going to put my pointless geeky hat on for a moment because I've actually researched some of these little things.
Oh, I love your pointless geeky hat. It's so punky.
Put it this way, for Magic Convention, which was streamed on the internet, the only thing I was truly interested in and rapturously engaged for the entire thing was a presentation about the rating system of Spanish television channels.
You are now an expert.
Bearing in mind, we're talking Magic Convention, and I'm enjoying that. Anyway, in the UK, I think it's a similar problem you have over there. There's no real way of being able to keep track of any downloaded or time-shifted content at all by one single source.
Right.
It's still like the Nielsen ratings that you got in the US. You have X number of houses which have a box which is able to monitor what is being watched on the TV.
Right, and there's a ratio of if one of those households is watching the show, that means 800,000 households are also watching it.
If it was 800,000 households here, I would be worried.
Well, it's probably a smaller scale there, but yeah, that's one Nielsen family represents a lot of other people.
So with that, they're able to work out who watched the shows on the main channels, who's watched them on the +1, who's watched them on the +2 channels. These are time shifted by 1 hour and 2 hour. This isn't on demand. This is an actual separate channel, which is time shifted by 1 hour or 2 hours.
And that is proof that there are too many damn channels.
Channel 5 has a +24.
Now that at least makes a little more sense.
Well, you can watch the same program the following night. The problem is, if it's a daily show that happens at the same night every night on the weekday, you're perpetually behind until the weekend.
Yes, well,
which is, it's weird.
That's a charge I get a lot, that I'm perpetually behind.
Anyway, the ratings board are able to detect those shows perfectly fine. They can tell who's watching these. With on-demand content, they can't.
Right.
I know that Nielsen is trying to work out some way of being able to detect from the audio signature of a show being broadcast or being viewed, that they can record or they could pick that up and then say, yeah, they're watching this at this time for this amount of minutes. So they are working on things like that for Nielsen, at least. I think the UK is doing something similar. But there's no central body that's able to not even attempting to accurately record all channel content. The BBC obviously knows how many people watched a certain repeat of Doctor Who for a certain episode and on what time of the year it is. What time of the week they watch it on, and so on.
Right.
So they can do that. But then it becomes a broadcaster-dependent thing. The BBC knows how long it is for iPlayer. Channel 4 knows what it is for 4OD. And so on. You don't have a central body that's able to monitor that.
And, this is the exciting opportunity here for a service like Apple TV. Now, of course, they're not going to take over the world or anything, but all of that information for all of those different channels and all of those different platforms flow through the Apple TV. And so for at least all people who own one of those, you get complete, and because it's all digital, you get exact numbers. You're not guessing anymore. You know precisely how many people watched or at least streamed a certain program.
Yes and no. I'm going to have to disagree with you there, because you will certainly know how many people watched X program over the course of a week through the Apple TV.
Right.
But then it becomes a case of demographics. I'm not going to shy away from this. I've got to say this. Not everyone's going to buy an Apple TV.
What?
I know. You have all these other devices out there.
Yeah, but you're right. You're completely right. Of course, Roku will have their own figures, and
so you'll certainly know for the target audience of the Apple TV,
right?
That certain section of the market will be watching this. You'll get to learn they're going to be watching this sort of program, this period of time, this number of times a week. You'll work it out for that section of the market. But then you've got to factor in how many people are doing this on Roku, how many people are using their Xbox One to watch it, how many people have still got a PlayStation 3 and are watching it on there.
Right. Well, but this is the thing is that while it's still not one monolithic source, somebody could conceivably add up who watched it through the PlayStation, who watched it through the Xbox, who watched it through Apple TV, who watched it through Roku, and add that up into something, into a final figure. But the thing that's exciting is that figure, if you could pull all that data together, you would have a pretty precise figure instead of one family represents X number of thousands of others. You'd have a very precise figure, which could, I think will, shake up, how popular we think certain things are.
Problem, though.
I also wish, I do happen to wish, though, that there was a way for Nielsen or any other system to figure out when you've just got the TV on because the dog likes it and when you're actually watching.
The problem with what you believe there is a utopian system where someone collects all this data from all these different channels for this, is the channels are the ones who are going to get all the data.
Right.
And the device owner is going to have... the device producers are going to have all this data, but they're not necessarily going to share it.
Yeah.
And that's going to be the problem.
Well, but I mean, for example, with app usage, there's plenty of app analysts out there, right? Like Flurry, just to pull an example. They can produce very detailed and very accurate statistics on exactly how many people have used a given iOS app or an Android app. And so they can, and by combining those two figures together, they can, from a single source, tell the developer, this is exactly how this is doing, and break it out, of course, any way you like.
Channels will be able to do it for their own content.
Yeah.
But they're going to struggle with getting similar comparable figures for other services.
Yeah, I suppose you're right.
That's going to be difficult.
Yeah, but at least I still think that even if just individual channels have this data, having more accurate data might produce different results than the ones we're getting now. Particularly as TV will probably start to become a little more interactive. For example, if you're participating in the app chat on, say, The Walking Dead, that's a more engaged viewer than somebody who's vacuuming the house but just put the TV on for some background noise. So it's going to be interesting to see where this goes. But I like the idea of TV as apps. It may not be, as Mike says, it may not be the future of TV, but it is the most logical path that we're on now, because it's already quite popular to do it that way. Well,
there's one thing I just realised.
What?
The wonder of democratically created television.
Oh, God. Television by committee?
Oh, well, no. If you think about it, the natural extension for all these ratings is that a TV channel will know this sort of content works, this actor will work, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Again, this comes back to the magician convention. They are able to see timestamps and screenshots at specific times to see what was being shown on the TV, to see if someone stays with it or switches to another channel, whether they get boring. And they're able to analyse quite a few different things from it and have some sort of vague idea of what works and what doesn't.
Mm. They do this during the U.S. presidential debates. There will always be at least one channel that has a room full of people that are hooked up to machines that will monitor them, and their level of interest is gauged live as the debate goes on. Now, of course, it's a presidential debate, so it's very low and just goes down to 0 at points. But then somebody says something like Jobs and shoots back up again. It's kind of interesting, but yeah, it would be great if these performers all had little earpieces and they could hear, oh, you're boring now. Quick, turn it around.
But yeah, we are skating slowly towards television program designed by committee, and it can work and it might not work. I'll give you 2 examples. One idea of a program that we know and you will have heard of this program, almost certainly, a program that's been designed by committee was on Netflix.
Right.
You remember when House of Cards was first created?
Mm-hmm.
They said they found that a lot of people liked watching political dramas and watched the original House of Cards quite a bit and liked it, and it had quite good success. So they knew that the backstabbing political storyline sort of thing would kind of work and kind of appeal to the audience that they've got. And then they also found that people liked watching Kevin Spacey. Right. And they went, let's put the two together. And they made House of Cards, and it became a huge success.
Yeah.
That's the first time that I've heard of any sort of audience-based, designing based purely on audience preferences in such a way.
Yes,
in such detail.
I was sort of thinking back to the Monkees, which was a created TV show, and the group was a created group based on, well, we think people like, slapstick style comedy, and we know people like the Beatles, so let's fuse those together and let's create a show. And it worked out very well, actually. But
Netflix was able to generate these numbers themselves.
Yeah, that's the key difference.
That's the big thing.
Yeah.
But then we're going to get to a point where you have on TV, this is actually a real program. It hasn't come out in the US yet, but I believe it's going to be put onto the Sci-Fi Channel at some point.
Siffy? Go on.
However it's pronounced. Now, I've told you about this in the past, but I'm sure our listeners won't have. There's a channel called ITV2. ITV2 is the sub-channel of a major broadcaster in the UK.
Yes, they're the ones who prevented us from having the Apple TV be called ITV.
Bingo. But they are allowed to take a little bit of risk because they're not the mainstream channel. They're a digital-only channel. So they can do things that are not necessarily going to be perfect TV.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with that in mind, they came up with an idea for a game show, which was, quite frankly, a stupid idea, a horror-based game show. They created a game show called Release the Hounds, which had a horror-based task, which allowed them to get some sort of advantage in terms of distance. And then a member of the team would have to go down a track to a distance based on the advantage distance that they've earned.
Mm-hmm.
And then they had to run the rest of the track to a ladder and climb up that ladder to win whatever money that they've collected at that point. Chasing them down the track are a team of police dogs who will bring them down.
This is awful.
It is an extremely awful idea.
Yeah.
And you're thinking, this is something from The Running Man. They had climbing for dollars, didn't they?
Yeah, this is something. This is
Running Man.
Yeah, this is something from Night of the Hunter, really.
But at the same time, you know full well that if they said to an audience, how about a horror-based game show? The audience will say no. How about let's have the contestants winning money by trying to run away from dogs while screaming like little girls?
Yeah,
no, that won't work. It shouldn't work. And yet it does. They're on their third series of it.
Wow. You'd think the dogs would be pretty tired by now.
But you know full well, if this was done by committee, the individual parts wouldn't work. And yet it does.
That's funny. Although, the one last thing that I want to talk about before we leave this topic is I'm all for making TV more interesting or more specialist, I guess, which is kind of what these things do. Certain people are going to just watch the Home and Garden Channel app or the Home and Garden Channel all the time. They just love it. They can't get enough of it, and that's their show. That's their whole network. And, of course, if you like one show on that network, you probably like them all. But TV just seems, and this is my perspective as a cord cutter, TV just seems so much less relevant now. And I grew up. TV was my babysitter. I am one of that generation. TV was another family member in a very real sense. So, but these days, TV just doesn't matter as much. I mean, there's certain shows that I hear about that you want to try and keep up to date on, both for conversational purposes and also because it genuinely sounds good. Mad Men, Game of Thrones, House of Cards, Community, some of these other programs. I get the new Doctor Who off of iTunes the day after its broadcast. So those are shows that I care to keep up with. Grand total of about 4 hours a week for while the season is running, and then most of the year it's not. So my even just paying attention to the shows I want to pay attention to, my TV watching is way down. It's really not much higher than someone who has no TV at all. So I wonder if this is sort of like the 3D. When 3D came into movies, they thought all the movie theaters would have this tactical advantage that other mediums couldn't offer, and so that would bring people back to the cinema. And it didn't. I mean, the movie business is doing fine, but it didn't change the game. So I have to wonder whether, in the age of the internet, whether TV really is relevant as the money that is involved merits. I don't want to bring up the whole Amazon just paid way too much money for not Top Gear, but that was silly money, Amazon, and you don't really have it to spare. So what are you doing? It's just a TV show. It's just a cheap TV show with 3 guys and some cars, for God's sakes. But anyway. All right, moving on. So one of the other topics we've been following with great interest of late is whether or not the government is going to be able to force Apple or other companies to unlock and extract data off of seized iPhones from suspects in criminal activities. In particular, there was a case that got interesting because the suspect's phone was iOS 7. What does that mean? Well, it means that it's not fully encrypted. All iPhones that are running iOS 8 and higher are encrypted, and Apple doesn't have the decryption keys. So it cannot extract any data off the drive at all. Even if they could bypass the lock screen, it can't. There's nothing there for it to take out except a bunch of gobbledygook because it's all encrypted. The Touch ID has to be used, or the person has to give up their password or something like that in order for that to work. But of course, we're talking about cases here where the suspect adamantly refuses to do those things. But in this case, the suspect in this methamphetamine case had an iOS 7 phone, and the FBI had it. Department of Justice, the Department of Justice had it, and they wanted the contents off of it. Now, they could do this themselves. This is the part that never gets mentioned in these stories, is given time, they could do this themselves. But they don't want to spend the time because, right, of a speedy trial and all that sort of thing. So they wanted Apple to just do it for them. And Apple said, technically, we can do this. It is an iOS 7 phone, so we can give you the data that is not encrypted on the phone. And that is, just certain like email headers, but not the contents, or just certain parts of the typical data that people have on the phone. But Apple said, but you have to follow the correct legal procedure, and it has to be transparent and proper. And so after jumping through those hoops, a particular judge overseeing this case was like, whoa. I'm not sure the government can force a private company to do this sort of thing just to make their jobs easier. So they were wrangling back and forth about this, whether or not there's court precedent one way or the other. And of course, there's examples that go both ways. Eventually, this has just gotten short-circuited because the suspect in this case has now pled guilty to the charges, which means the DOJ does not need to extract any information off the phone. And because more and more people, very few people are left actually, that have iOS 7 or earlier on their phones, this is going to become less and less of even a possibility. But it was an interesting question. My position, and this is just my position, I'm not speaking for MacNN as a whole, but I just want to pass on my personal opinion, is that the Constitution seems very clear to me on this point, which is that a U.S. citizen has the right to be secure in their person and papers. Now, of course, back when the Constitution was written, your papers were literal papers that usually were kept in some sort of safe or a special drawer with a lock and key. Today, we don't generally do that sort of thing, but our phone can be very easily interpreted as our papers, our personal stuff. And so it should, I feel, be difficult for law enforcement, even when they are dead certain that there's incriminating evidence on there. It should be difficult for them to get it, and they should have to go through a lot of steps. In this case, again, the authorities have the ability to eventually decrypt encrypted stuff. It just takes them a really long time. And of course, the more strong the encryption is, the longer it will take. But to me, the fact that a potential terrorist or child molester or some horrible person like that might benefit from how difficult this encryption is to deal with is I have to be frank, it's a small price to pay for the freedom of everyone else. And, I'm sitting in the United States at the moment, which is a country that has decided as a society that a certain number of dead people is an acceptable price to pay for the freedom to have a lot of guns about. So you may disagree with my position, but you can't deny that societies make up their minds collectively through their elected representatives or just through the community. They make up their minds about what's the price. Do we really want to put a stoplight in that corner, or do we want to wait until some kid gets run over and then put a stoplight there? We make these kinds of decisions all the time. And different countries, different regions have made different decisions on these things. But as a country, generally, there's no constitutional obligation for the rights of citizens, which are embodied in the Constitution, to make law enforcement's job easier. And that's my take on it. But sadly, we're not going to get that ruling now, because we're not going to find out one way or another. Probably some future case, perhaps, but this is going to get more rare because there's less and less Apple will be able to do. So, I hate to sound like I'm saying, if you're a criminal, please upgrade to at least iOS 8, but when it comes to a question of making authoritarianism easier to abuse or freedom or security in your personal effects more secure, I'm going to come down on the side of more security. But this is a choice that we're going to have to, and by we I mean both the collective society and the authorities, are going to have to wrestle with. And it's interesting to see them wrestling with it. I don't know. I don't own an Android phone, so I'm wondering if this level of security is found on that platform. Do you know?
Yeah, you can certainly encrypt a device. You can certainly encrypt files.
But I mean, is it automatically done from the manufacturer, or do you do it yourself?
I don't actually know that bit, but I know that there are phones on the market that do boast about encryption and so on, and not just the flashy security-minded ones. But yeah, talking about this, there's two things that I would love to bring up about this. First off, with this case specifically, it's amazing that we got this guy who's facing 3 charges, drug-related charges, and he's not pleading guilty until the government is stepping up and saying, we want to get whatever's on this phone. It's only just now that it's come up to this point where he's saying, yeah, okay, I'm pleading guilty. What was the rest of the case like? Is the case that flimsy that they were hoping that there was some special bit of information stored on that phone that could bust the case wide open enough for them to be able to say, he did it? Mm-hmm. Was there? Could they possibly have guaranteed that they'd be able to say, yeah, if you go into the phone, you will find this or that? Or were they saying, you're probably going to find it, it's a bit of a fishing trip, trust us?
Yeah. Well, and that's the concern. See, this is the thing. Most people have been saying, well, this guy is clearly a real methamphetamine dealer. Why not just get the stuff off the phone? We don't need his permission. But this is the problem, is that there might be other data on the phone that doesn't directly relate to the case, but it might be incriminating in other ways, or just,
it could hurt other people as well.
Yeah, hurt other people. So that's where you start getting into a very murky bit of water. And this is exactly why the founding fathers said, nope, people's personal effects should be secure except under certain circumstances. And they have to be very clear, and there has to be real suspicion, and there has to be some surrounding evidence that would suggest that, yes, he kept a list of all his buyers on the phone or something like that. So
there's got to be something.
Yeah, it's got to be something, but but it's not clear to us whether or not he pleaded guilty just because, they're about to get my phone, or if they'd just been working out some sort of a deal and they finally reached terms and he said, okay, I'm guilty, in exchange for perhaps a lighter sentence or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, that's the first thing. I kind of am interested in whether the case is as flimsy as I think it will be. The second thing is just be glad you've got companies that actually want to encrypt your phones and actually want to deal with encryption.
Well, I mean, there's a joke that conspiracy theorists are always seen as nutters, way off into the fringe. But every so often, somebody like Edward Snowden comes along, and you turned out that the worst nightmares of the tinfoil hat wearers were correct. And that makes us mad because we hate for those conspiracy theorist guys to be correct about anything. It's because they're nuts. But
shall I go one stage lower than conspiracy theorist?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. How about this? Last week, TalkTalk, a major UK internet provider, was attacked and it suffered a breach, which involved potentially 4 million customers being affected. And this includes things like their names, address, date of birth, bank account details, most of their credit cards with a bit of the credit card number removed for security. And last week that was, oh no, think of the children, that sort of thing. And then this week on Sunday, I do apologise, but it erupted on Monday. The CEO of TalkTalk, Dido Harding, which sounds so Mills and Boone, it's amazing. You will love the phrasing of this. Our data wasn't encrypted, nor are you legally required to encrypt it. We have complied with all our legal implications in terms of storing our financial information.
Yes, well,
they basically said, we didn't encrypt it, we didn't have to do it. We are technically legally right. And the horrible thing is they're actually quite correct.
Yeah, they are correct.
According to the Data Protection Act of 1998, a company must take, quote, appropriate technical and organizational measures should be taken to prevent unauthorized usage of data.
Yeah.
But it doesn't specifically say encrypt it.
Right. Well, and that's because it's the act of 1998.
But they had encryption back then as well.
Well, certainly they did, but I mean, it was harder to imagine the level of sophistication of which hacking attacks have become. But also, that statement from that CEO is like lighting up a neon sign in Times Square saying, you don't want to do business with us because we will do the bare minimum.
It was the most boneheaded thing I heard from a CEO this week.
Yeah,
week. And bearing in mind, I have a load of the CEOs of American carriers on my Twitter account. That one has to be pretty horrible.
Yeah, that's true. And I should hope that the consumers will hurt them in the marketplace after this, and I suspect they will. But yeah, that was a completely boneheaded thing to say. But I think at this point, everybody has gotten the wake-up call. You have to encrypt the data at this point, unless you're TalkTalk. It doesn't matter what the law provides. You have to go above and beyond the bare minimum.
Generally speaking, if we're talking about a small mom and pop shop with a database, I understand their idea of, yes, we'll encrypt it, because they're a small shop. They know that they've got to do this anyway.
Right.
You could possibly feasibly believe that they'll not encrypt it because they're not a financial institution. They're not dealing with a lot of extremely damaging data that, if it got out, could potentially hurt people. They know full well they're not Ashley Madison in size or in danger, so that's fine. But when you're talking about a major company and you've got customers in the millions, you expect encryption on a bare minimum level.
Yeah.
And yet they did nothing. They've done other security measures, but no.
Yeah.
And what's even worse is they've had 2 arrests so far in the UK, one in Overnon, one in Englandshire somewhere, and it's 2 15-year-old boys.
Exactly. And
if your security is defeated by someone who has fewer qualifications than the team from Scooby-Doo, you're doing things wrong.
Yeah, you're doing things wrong. And that's the thing. I mean, yes, the law needs to be updated, but also these companies need to put on their common sense hats for 5 minutes and think about what would happen if there was a breach. What would be exposed, and who would be blamed? Are people going to blame those 2 15-year-olds? No. They're going to blame TalkTalk, especially now that CEO had such a dumb thing to say. But yeah, it comes down to a point now where, ironically, the government would like people at home to encrypt their stuff less, but businesses have to encrypt their stuff more. But the bottom line here, and I want everybody to remember this going forward, is whether you think Edward Snowden did the right thing or the wrong thing in making the information that he made available, we can have a more informed debate about this. Next up, off to the Supreme Court. Yep, Apple is formally asking the Supreme Court to toss out both the original ebook guilty verdict from Judge Denise Cote, and then the appeal, which was a little more quite a bit more sympathetic to Apple, but still basically upheld Judge Cote's original decision. Now, I have very strong opinions about this ebook case. I think it's a travesty of justice, but I'm not going to go on about it, as I did in the last segment. I'm just going to leave it at that. There's plenty of very clear evidence that may not be sufficient to get Apple out of this hook, but should shed more light on at least the rationale, the motivation for both the publishers and Apple's role in this whole mess, which didn't actually turn out to be a mess at all. Here's the thing that kills me about this case is that Apple acted, at least one of their rationales, along with the publishers, was that they feared Amazon becoming a monopoly. By the U.S. definition of monopoly, Amazon was a monopoly at the time. The question really is, should the government break up a monopoly, or should other companies act either individually or in concert to break up a monopoly? That's really the question that's going on here. And, of course, Apple was found to be, no, you conspired with these other publishers to raise prices, as though that was a crime, to raise prices on ebooks and to force Amazon to use the agency model rather than the wholesale model. I'm not going to get into it. But Apple's going to ask them to toss this ebook verdict, and their rationale that they want to use for this is interesting. They're not saying that anymore. They were saying Judge Cote is just flat out wrong. They tried that twice, and that didn't work. So now they're trying this, which is that Judge Cote behaved properly, but used the wrong framework to arrive at her decision. The framework that she used would lead you to that conclusion that she came to. Apple's arguing that that the framework they should have used is a rule of reason analysis, which is where the court weighs all of the circumstances, both things that are seen to be anti-competitive and pro-competitive, and figure out which of these two motivations was really at the heart of it and which one had the greatest benefit or negative cost. Judge Cote's rule of reason analysis was poor, and so what the company believes, what Apple believes, and has maintained through the appeal, is that instead of doing that, they should, the judge, whoever it is that finally decides this, should have to back up its rationale on a per se basis. In other words, going back to court rulings that were in similar cases and explaining how this new decision lines up with previous law on this. That really wasn't done up until this point. Will the Supreme Court do it? Hard to say. But we're getting ready. We're gearing up for another battle, is the bottom line here. The thing that drives me crazy about this is that the DOJ, Department of Justice, acted, and I'm trying to give them the benefit of a lot of doubt here, they acted to protect Amazon, who they felt were being ganged up on and bullied by the combination of the publishers and Apple. Not an argument I subscribe to, but okay. The other thing that they worried about is that the effect of this would raise ebook prices, and that would hurt consumers. Now, I'm all for government agencies looking out for consumers, so fine. As it turns out, I feel like the DOJ ignored the long-term effect of books selling at $10 versus $12, but let's skip that for the moment. Book prices did go up after Apple and the publishers hit on this agency agreement. They did, in fact, go up, but not for long. They're now back down to around the same period. And Amazon is back to being a monopoly again. They have almost, or at least close enough in legal definition, you have to have 75% of a market to be considered a monopoly. They have it. They've got it. They're a monopoly. Now, the thing that a lot of people don't understand is it's not illegal to be a monopoly. It's illegal to abuse your monopoly position. And the thing that drives me crazy, and a lot of other people crazy, even putting aside whether or not you're in favor of Apple or not, but the thing that drives us crazy is Amazon has a long track record of abusing their monopoly position with publishers, but the Department of Justice does absolutely nothing about this. Forget Apple, forget Barnes & Noble, forget Sony, all of these other people who tried to enter the market. It's just plain an abusive monopoly, and something should have been done about that. But there you go. I said I wasn't going to say much about this, didn't I?
Famous last words. I'm not going to go on about it like in that last segment.
You can always tell my articles from everybody else's, particularly Mike's. Mike's articles are 2-3 paragraphs long. Mine are 8-10 paragraphs long. So, but the bottom line is, do we think, let's pretend for the moment that the Supreme Court takes this up and decides either in favor of Apple or against Apple. In other words, and by that I mean reinforcing the previous verdicts. What's going to be the effect? Yeah, my feeling is that if they don't overturn or at least modify this decision, send it back to the court for reconsideration in some aspects, that Amazon will be emboldened to be even more abusive to their monopoly. And if you don't think they are, ask any publisher. And I do mean any publisher, large or small. They'll give you an earful about Amazon. It's a love-hate relationship, to put it mildly. But so I feel like this, hopefully, I hope at least that the Supreme Court will modify the decision. I'm really not quite sure whether Apple crossed a legal line or not. My familiarity with antitrust law is not complete. I've been well versed in it enough now, having covered this case for a few years, that I feel like Apple probably didn't actually break antitrust law. They may have broken some other laws, but not that particular one. I want to kind of reserve judgment on whether Apple handled it correctly or not. Maybe they didn't. And maybe they need some punishment for that. Apple is asking the Supreme Court to consider the overall effect of not allowing businesses to challenge a standing monopoly. And that has huge ramifications for the entire U.S. economy. Because as we've seen with other industries, such as pharmaceuticals and oil, what happens is there used to be lots of smaller companies, and they eventually, inevitably, capitalism being what it is, consolidate. and become larger and larger and larger. And whenever they feel the need to become more powerful, they'll consolidate some more until finally there's only, one or two. And ultimately, Apple says, that harms consumers more than perhaps Apple not handling this conversation with publishers quite the way they should have. If the Supreme Court should decide in their favor and just toss the verdict out entirely, I don't think that Apple would just go home scot-free. I think there would still be some legal ramifications. The Department of Justice would bring up some sort of other aspect that needs to be dealt with. But one of the Department of Justice's big concerns was that Apple didn't have a good policy in place to prevent them from abusing antitrust law. So that the judge appointed a monitor. The monitor had a very contentious relationship with Apple, but as a result, both Apple and the Department of Justice and the monitor all agreed that Apple has improved their antitrust policies and are unlikely to break them in the future. And remember, Apple has other stores. This is only about their ebook stores, which is one of their tiniest actual businesses. They also deal with movie studios. They also deal with music. They also deal with other types of goods and digital services. So it's amazing to me that somehow Apple was an evil antitrust person on just this one area and nowhere else. And speaking of abusive monopolies, cue the music. I just got done saying that Amazon has occasionally been kind of abusive to publishers, has played hardball with them, maybe right up to the point of the law, maybe a little past the point of the law. But Amazon is not shy about being aggressive in the marketplace. And it's one of the reasons why they do an enormous amount of business, despite the fact that they still haven't figured out how to make any money off that. Anyway, so Amazon has suddenly decided that any set-top box, like the Chromecast, like the Apple TV, that don't support Amazon Prime Video shall not be sold on Amazon anymore. It's a risk because Amazon has earned its reputation by selling everything. That's why people think of it first a lot of the times when they want to order something. It's because they're sure Amazon will have it. So if Amazon starts playing hardball like this, and there's certain books you can't get, or there's certain videos you can't get, or there's certain items you can't get anymore, this could hurt Amazon. Amazon is reckoning that this will bring the people who are excluded from the store into line with what they want. But the problem is, of course, it's not really clear whether or not Apple TV or Google's Chromecast are perfectly okay with Amazon having Prime Video as part of their lineup. But Amazon just hasn't done it because it is, Amazon's responsibility. As far as I can tell, Apple, at least, doesn't seem to have a problem with services that, on one level, compete with the Apple TV. Netflix is available on the Apple TV. Hulu is available on the Apple TV. And let's face it, Amazon Prime Video is essentially like that, with the only difference being that it's only available to people who have a Prime membership. So it's it's kind of its own channel, I guess. It's sort of how you have to authenticate with a cable carrier in order to access certain channels. So, too, you have to authenticate with Amazon. For whatever reason, Amazon has never made Prime Video available for the Apple TV and has never come out and said Apple forbids us to do it either. So you really have to wonder what's going on here. But is this, Malcolm, is this blackmail? To be fair, they're not just picking on Apple, they're picking on Google too.
Well, just to be clear here, the actual problem is Amazon released a statement because they warned about this at the start of the month, and now they've actually yanked Apple TV and Chromecast from the store and promoting Fire TV Stick instead. Mm-hmm. They've released a statement saying, It's important that the streaming media players we sell interact well with Prime Video in order to avoid customer confusion.
Which is a load.
Yes.
Load.
The thing is, it's not really Apple's fault. It's not really Google's fault. I know that with the 3rd gen and previous Apple TVs, you had to do a fair bit of developmental witchcraft in order to create an app that worked on there. Mm-hmm. But with the 4th gen, at least, they've released software development kits. They've released developer units.
Yeah.
So they're welcoming people to create stuff for the Apple TV. They're basically saying, make things for this.
Yeah.
Show it on this. It's not just Apple that's done that. Google has their Cast SDKs, right, which anyone can use in their own app. There is nothing out of the ordinary for, on the Chromecast side, Amazon coming along and saying, okay, let's add the Cast button to our mobile app and we can use the Chromecast.
Right.
That's down to them to put it in their app.
Yes, but by saying what they've said, they've essentially, and by promoting their Fire Stick, every time I say Fire, I'm sorry, Amazon, dear Amazon, Fire Stick, really? Are we cavemen? Is that the problem? They've essentially set themselves up as we don't have any incentive to develop these apps for Apple TV or for Chromecast, no matter how easy they make it for us. We are essentially self-interested. And the initial reaction that a lot of people got is this should be illegal. And to which I would say, because I'm a legal expert, as you can tell from the last segment, to which I would say no, Amazon is covered for being a jerk, to a point anyway.
Yeah, it's Amazon's clubhouse. It's their Amazon's rules. What they decide to sell on it. It's a private enterprise. If it were something more governmental or something more official, then they would be immediately slapped with the legal stick quite quickly and swiftly, and quite painfully.
Yes. The people who bought the Fire Stick also got the legal stick.
Yes. People might say that this is antitrust. This really isn't antitrust.
No.
This is a shopkeeper who's decided that they're not going to sell Coca-Cola, they're going to sell Pepsi products instead.
Yeah.
It just happens that they own a lot of shares in Pepsi, and it kind of helps them a bit more.
Yeah.
But there's nothing seriously, majorly illegal or anything else about this.
Yes, you're right. You're correct.
Their argument that these devices are not compatible, it's kind of like a teenager saying, I haven't been paid for mowing the lawn because no one's mowed the lawn for me.
Yeah. But yeah, this is the thing. I mean, are they being jerks? Yeah, they probably are. Are they trying to get Apple TV and Apple and Google to give them some sort of concessions? Maybe. But here's the bottom line. Again, memo to Amazon, this isn't going to work. In other words, you're not going to make Apple TV and Google Chromecast less popular and your Fire TV Stick more popular. If that was your goal, no, that's not going to work. Because it is insanely easy to get these two products elsewhere. And people just will. Because, I mean, I have no idea how successful the Fire TV Stick has been, or the Fire TV. And Amazon hasn't told us, so nobody actually knows. But we can gather from statistics elsewhere about how many people use one or the other services that it's not very. And that's not going to change. This would be like Microsoft saying we're not going to develop programs for other platforms anymore. The entire world would just say, well, who cares?
Well, here's the thing. If you go into a search engine and you wanted to buy a Chromecast or an Apple TV, you're going to type in Google Chromecast or Apple TV. First listings for Google Chromecast, ignoring the advertising ones, which are basically buy the Chromecast here, the top one being Google itself and the second one being, in the UK at least, Argos.
Right.
The first proper listing after that is Google's own sales page for the Chromecast.
Yeah.
If you do a search for Apple TV, your top listing is going to be Apple's Apple TV store.
Yep.
actually, if you're searching for a product, it's not that difficult to go into Google and say, "Oh, I want this." Found it.
Yeah. Well, but I will say this: a lot of people, myself included, use Amazon as our Christmas store because we wait too long to send out our presents, and so. This will cost Apple and Google some sales because people will be on Amazon for the entire evening of December 24th just buying things that are on Amazon because they can get there by December 26th. So this will hurt them for Christmas. But in the long term, it is not going to change the game. It's not going to make the Fire TV Stick more popular. And the sooner Amazon figures this out, and decides to go back to being a store that carries all kinds of products, the better. At least that's how I feel about it.
You know, I don't know what kind of advertising you got over there for the Fire TV Stick, but we've had a fair amount of it over here.
No. Well, I don't have a television, so I can't say with any authority, but I can say that I have yet to see one in the wild. Even one. I see Chromecasts a fair amount. I see Apple TVs a lot. Fire TV Stick, nobody even knows what I'm talking about when I bring it up. Roku, Roku people know. Even if they don't own one, they understand what that is. The fact that you can have a lot of these services through your game box is probably the biggest factor that's stopping all of those aforementioned companies, Apple, Google, and Roku, from being bigger than they are in that area. Because, you already bought the Xbox. I'll just use this. So, or PlayStation or whatever. This is sort of an underhanded move, but it is within their rights. If you're a customer of Amazon, I am. I'm a Prime member, in fact. You have to, every so often, you have to evaluate, are they doing this sort of thing for my benefit? Or are they doing this sort of thing not for my benefit? And reevaluate based on that. Thankfully, the internet, at least at present, still makes it incredibly easy to buy elsewhere. Our own William Gallagher has kicked off a new series of MacNN's apps we can't live without. And a couple of years ago, and I can't believe it's been 2 years already, but a couple of years ago we did a series called My 5, in which we talked about 5 apps that we really liked that were of a certain type. So the apps were all grouped together. This time, this is a little bit different in that we're talking about apps that we just consider essential. Now, William has gone on record. If you routinely read his articles, you sort of detected a theme. And one of those themes is he writes a lot. And he also organizes a lot, which is why he's an incredibly productive writer. Remember, he writes a lot of stuff not for us, like books and things. So he has a lot of writing to do. And so unsurprisingly, Drafts 4 is in there. Simple Note is in there. I use Simple Note myself, actually. I was very upset with him for mentioning it because that was going to be one of mine. But, and of course, his beloved Omni products. He loves OmniFocus and he loves Omni Outliner. And he's absolutely right to do so. They are terrific. He also mentions things like Fantastical and Where To and Local Scope. The latter being a very UK-oriented program. But those are some of the things that he just uses every day and really relies on to get him to where he needs to be. Malcolm is next up in this series. We'll also hear from Mike and myself eventually. But Malcolm, if you wouldn't mind, could you give people one vital app that you rely on every day? It can be for the PC or the Mac, I don't care. But one of the ones that's going to be on your list.
I'm going to have to say 2 for the same task.
Okay.
Pixelmator, or Pixelmator, or how do they pronounce it?
Pixelmator.
Pixel Thingy, that'll do.
Yeah.
I use Pixel Thingy quite a lot for editing and so on of images, resizing, making composite images for deals, posts, and a few other things.
Yeah, for our job, it is pretty well essential, yes.
It is fantastic. On the PC, I use the new image manipulation project quite a bit, and I used to use it on the Mac as well. But I figured
that's also. I'm sorry, just to interrupt. Subtitle: the new image manipulation program is also known as GIMP.
Oh, I was hoping we were getting away from the NSFW tags.
Yeah. No, in terms of an acronym for the program, GIMP is acceptable.
Yeah.
If you call someone a GIMP, that would be bad. And I've just done it.
Well done. But Pixelmator for the most part is what I use for most image editing.
Mm-hmm.
Another part of the job, and you've probably come across this a few times as well, when you are covering a product launch and the manufacturer, the app developer, whatever, give you a pile of screenshots or a ton of product photos,
mm-hmm.
and you want to put them in the article. Unfortunately, the product photos that they've decided to give you are extremely high quality images, extremely high resolution, and 5 meg piece.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
Well, it takes too long to upload. Our system, our CMS, has to do the resizing, and that takes a while, and then it's just awful.
Yeah, my home connection is atrocious, and I will be punching someone at British Telecom at some point in the future unless they upgrade it soon. They've delayed it by 9 months now. But yeah, because of this problem, I've got a second app that I use for images. It's something called Resize It. It's a free app, and it just sits in the dock. If I've got a pile of images, I just highlight all the images, drag them to resize it, and I've got basic presets in there for what I like to upload to the site. So I have a certain level of quality. They come out as JPEGs. They have a certain resolution, as in max constraining. So it could be as much as X number of pixels high or this number of pixels wide.
Yeah.
And it just batch processes all of them, replaces the images with, replaces the original images, if I want to, with new, improved, easier to upload within a couple of seconds versions. And I chuck those up.
Yeah, I use a similar program myself called Sharp Resize that does essentially the same thing. It's not a batch processor, though, like Resize It. But I do have a couple of those as well. But Sharp, because I usually am only dealing with one image at a time, so Sharp Resize works out well for me. But yeah, these are super useful programs for our jobs, for what we do for the site. In addition to giving an extra shout out to Simple Note for my part, I really rely on Simple Note increasingly, I find. And yet it is the simplest, most basic word processor I own. And I'm notorious for having like 12 of them. I mean, not just because I'm testing things out. I mean, I have 12 that I use for different jobs. But for MacNN, I want something that's fast. I want something that syncs to all my devices. And I want something that's just plain text. And Simple Note does that even better than text editor Notes for me. Interestingly enough, we were comparing notes in the newsroom, and we all have mostly very different choices. And when I get around to my actual list, I'm going to focus not on programs that I use as part of my MacNN job, but programs I use outside of it. Well, that just about wraps it up for episode 39 of the MacNN podcast. Next week, episode 40. It'll be a landmark. We'll do something special. I don't know what, but we will. Probably a big story or something. Anyway, I'm Charles Martin, the editor of MacNN, and on behalf of managing editor Mike, who couldn't be here tonight, sorry, Mike, hope the drive works out okay, and Malcolm Owen, one of our lead news writers, and on behalf of the entire staff, we'd like to say thank you so much for listening. Tell your friends, and let's meet back here in a week, because there'll be more to talk about. Good night, everybody.